He stood alone in the dust, a German shepherd with a twisted leg, trembling under the weight of every whisper that rippled through the auction barn. Not a single hand went up, not one bid for the broken animal. The auctioneer's voice grew weary, his gavel hovering with finality as he prepared to condemn the dog to whatever fate awaited unwanted livestock. "Too much trouble," someone muttered. "Probably mean as a rattler," added another. The dog didn't growl or bark in his defense. He simply stood, amber eyes reflecting decades of dignity, despite his battered frame. His ribs showed through patchy fur, and a ring of scarred flesh around his neck told stories no creature should endure. Just as the gavel began its descent, a weathered hand rose from the back of the room, quiet, unhurried, but unmistakable. The crowd turned as one to find its source. A lean, copper-skinned man with silver streaks in his black hair and a face mapped with lines that spoke of desert winds and too many sorrows. Dakota Atakai didn't speak. He didn't need to. His raised hand carried more weight than any voice could bear. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The cabin stood at the edge of the Navajo reservation, where desert met pine forest, half a mile from the nearest neighbor. Once bright turquoise trim had faded to the color of forgotten sky, and the wooden porch listed slightly to the east, like it was leaning away from past conversations. For Dakota Atakai, that suited just fine. He hadn't come back to the reservation for talk. Inside, the main room served every purpose: kitchen, living space, bedroom in the corner behind a faded blanket hung as a partition. A wood stove occupied the center, radiating heat against the night chill that crept through the windows. The walls were mostly bare except for an old rifle mounted above the door and a single photograph face down on a side table. Dakota eased the German shepherd onto a worn rug near the stove. The dog's eyes never left him, tracking every movement with the hypervigilance of the repeatedly betrayed. In the better light, Dakota could see the extent of the animal's injuries, not just the twisted back leg that might never heal properly, but a tapestry of old scars beneath the patchy fur, particularly around the neck where a collar had once been embedded deep enough to leave permanent damage. "You've been through hell," Dakota murmured, his voice rough from disuse. He filled a bowl with water and placed it within reach, then backed away, giving the animal space. At 53, Dakota carried his own collection of scars, though most weren't visible. Military service in his 20s had left him with nightmares and a persistent ringing in his left ear. The years after, drifting from job to job across the Southwest, had added lines to his face that made him look older than his years. His black hair, once worn long in the traditional way, was now cut practically short, streaked with silver at the temples. He hadn't planned on bringing anything living back to this cabin. Plants died under his care. Conversations withered. That had been the point of moving to this isolated place after returning to the reservation 3 years ago, to be left alone with memories that never quite faded. But something in the dog's eyes at the auction had reflected back his own solitude, a recognition that ran deeper than pity. For the first night, they established boundaries without words. The dog remained alert, flinching at small sounds, accepting food only when Dakota moved away. Dakota worked quietly, preparing a better bed from old blankets, keeping his movements slow and predictable, 2 wounded souls circling each other carefully, neither quite trusting the possibility of connection. Sheriff Joseph Yazzie arrival at Dakota's cabin came unannounced, his tribal police truck kicking up dust clouds that hung in the evening air like omens. The dog, still nameless after 4 days, was the first to sense the approach, his ears pricking forward before his body stiffened into alertness. Dakota watched the change in the animal with curiosity, not aggression, but a wary recognition that seemed almost human in its calculation. "Evening, Dakota," Sheriff Yazzie said, removing his hat as he stepped onto the worn porch boards. "At 62. Yazzie carried himself with the quiet authority of a man who'd seen the reservation change across 4 decades of service. "Didn't expect company out this way." Dakota nodded once, neither friendly nor hostile. "Coffee's still hot if you want some." The offer was the most conversation he'd initiated with another human in weeks. Inside the cabin, Sheriff Yazzie settled into a chair that creaked beneath his weight. The dog positioned himself halfway between the two men, his injured leg tucked carefully beneath him, his eyes never leaving the visitor. "Smart animal," Yazzie observed. "Evaluating whether I'm a threat." "He's been doing that since I brought him home," Dakota replied. "Doesn't trust easy, but he watches everything. Remembers, too." The sheriff sipped his coffee, taking his time before speaking again. "There was a break-in at the old Thunder Basin Ranch 3 nights ago. Nothing stolen, far as we can tell, but someone tore through the office like they were looking for something specific." At the words Thunder Basin, the dog's head snapped up, a low whine escaping from his throat. Both men turned to look at him. "That means something to you, boy?" Yazzie asked, eyes narrowing. Eyes. The dog rose to his feet, limping in a circle before returning to his position, eyes now fixed on Dakota with an intensity that felt like accusation. "Strange coincidence," Dakota muttered, though the hairs on his neck had risen. "Maybe not so strange," Yazzie replied. "Thought you might remember that place. You shoed horses for old man Blackwood years back. Didn't you?" Dakota's face hardened. "That was a long time ago. Maxwell Blackwood still owns the property, even if he hasn't been seen there in years." The sheriff set his mug down carefully. "Someone's stirring up old business. Dakota, I figured you should know." After Yazzie left, Dakota sat alone in the growing darkness, watching the dog pace restlessly around the cabin. Thunder Basin, a name he'd tried to forget, connected to a man whose money he'd once taken without asking questions. The ranch where he'd heard things in the night that haunted his dreams still. Later, as wind whistled through the cabin's aging walls, Dakota pulled a wooden box from beneath his bed. Inside, beneath old military papers and faded photographs, lay a brittle receipt signed by Maxwell Blackwood, dated 5 years earlier, the last job he'd done before walking away, and beneath it, a newspaper clipping with a headline that turned his blood cold: "Local man missing. Investigation continues." The photograph showed his own face, or rather, the face of his twin brother Benjamin, who had vanished without a trace after telling Dakota he'd discovered something terrible at Thunder Basin Ranch. Dakota stared at his brother's face in the yellowed newspaper clipping, the similarity between them still striking even after years of separation. Benjamin had been the better one, college-educated, working with animal rescue organizations, always fighting for the voiceless, while Dakota had drifted after the war, taking odd jobs and keeping to himself. Benjamin had returned to the reservation with purpose. He was investigating something, Dakota whispered to the dog, who watched him with those penetrating amber eyes. "Something at Thunder Basin Ranch." The German shepherd limped closer, nudging the box with his nose. A low whine escaped his throat as he pawed at the papers, almost purposeful in his movements. "What are you trying to tell me?" Takoda murmured, his heart quickening. His heart. He dug deeper into the box, past old photographs and documents, until his fingers closed around a small leather notebook he hadn't opened in years. Benjamin's journal, given to him for safekeeping just days before his disappearance. With trembling hands, Takoda flipped through pages of his brother's neat handwriting notes about suspected animal fighting rings operating in the county, mentions of Thunder Basin Ranch as a possible location, and descriptions of a particular German shepherd being trained through cruel methods to become aggressive. Conditioning includes electrical burns and isolation. Benjamin had written, "Subject dog, number 1479, male GSD, approximately 3 years old, distinctive white chest marking shaped like lightning bolt." Dakota's breath caught, slowly, as if approaching a sacred ceremony. He reached toward the dog, who remained perfectly still as Dakota's fingers gently parted the fur on his chest. There, partially obscured by scars but still visible, was a white lightning-shaped marking. "It's you," Dakota whispered, voice breaking. "You belong to Benjamin." The dog, note number 1479, raised his head and locked eyes with Dakota in what could only be described as recognition. In that moment, dawn broke across Dakota's consciousness like lightning across the desert. This wasn't simply a stray that had ended up at auction. This was his brother's dog, the very animal Benjamin had been trying to save. A living connection to the twin he had lost. Dakota's hands shook as he turned to the final entries in the journal. Benjamin's last words were chilling. "Meeting confidential source tonight. Claims to have evidence connecting Blackwood directly to dogfighting operation. Photographs and financial records stored at old workshop behind main property." The final entry was dated the day before Benjamin disappeared. Dakota closed the journal and looked at the dog, who hadn't moved, hadn't broken his steady gaze. "You need a name," Dakota said finally. "Something better than a number." He thought of the Navajo words his grandmother had taught him long ago, searching for meaning that would honor this survivor who had somehow found his way back. "Naltsus," he decided. "It means paper in our language, thin but strong, bearing important messages, preserving stories that must be told." The newly named Naltsus tilted his head slightly, as if considering the name, then lowered his body to rest against Dakota's leg. It was the closest the dog had voluntarily come to him since their first night. "We're going to find out what happened to him," Dakota promised, resting a gentle hand on Naltsus's scarred back. "For Benjamin, for you." Outside, thunder rolled across distant mesas, a storm gathering strength on the horizon. But inside the cabin, something else was taking shape, a bond between two damaged souls, a purpose emerging from years of aimless drift, and a resolve hardening like clay in desert heat. Tomorrow, they would begin their search for the truth. Tonight, they would remember. The drive to Dr. Sierra Begay's veterinary clinic took Dakota through the heart of the reservation, past weather-beaten hogans and modern homes alike. The juxtaposition of traditional and contemporary Navajo life that had always made him feel like a man straddling two worlds. Naltsus sat in the passenger seat of his battered pickup, head high despite his injuries, eyes constantly scanning the landscape as if searching for something only he could recognize. Sierra's clinic occupied an old trading post at the crossroads, its adobe walls freshly painted turquoise, a color sacred in healing traditions. When Dakota entered with Naltsus limping faithfully beside him, Sierra looked up from her paperwork with surprise. They had been classmates years ago, before Dakota enlisted and Sierra left for veterinary school. But like many on the reservation, she had heard about his self-imposed isolation after returning from war. "Dakota Atakai," she said, removing her reading glasses. "I heard you'd picked up a stray at Billings' auction, but I didn't believe it. Not your style to get involved in anything these days." "Things change," Dakota replied, his voice rough from disuse. "He needs looking at something more thorough than I can do." Sierra approached carefully, her movements gentle as she knelt before Naltsus. "Hello there," she murmured, allowing the dog to sniff her hand before she touched him. "You've been through something terrible, haven't you?" "For nearly an hour." Sierra examined Naltsus while Dakota watched silently from a corner of the examination room. She documented the old fracture in his hind leg, the malnutrition, the various scars. But when she parted the fur along his flanks, her breath caught. "Dakota, come look at this," she said quietly. Beneath the dog's fur were unmistakable patterns of circular burns, spaced with deliberate precision along pressure points. "These aren't accidents," Sierra said, her voice hardening. "These were done with cattle prods. It's a technique used in illegal dogfighting, targeting nerve points to make the animal aggressive through pain." Dakota's jaw tightened as he thought of his brother's journal entries. "Can you tell how long ago?" "Some are old, healed over, others more recent." Sierra continued her examination, finding more evidence with each careful touch. "There's something else," she added, parting the fur around Naltsus's neck to reveal an old wound. "This looks like an embedded collar was removed probably when they dumped him after he was no longer useful for fighting." As Dakota absorbed this, Sierra stepped back, her dark eyes studying him intently. "This isn't just about helping a stray, is it? There's something more here." Dakota hesitated, the habit of silence warring with the need for allies. "Finally?" He placed Benjamin's journal on the examination table. "My brother was investigating illegal dogfighting rings before he disappeared," he said. "I think Naltsus belonged to him, or at least Benjamin was trying to rescue him. I think this dog might be connected to what happened to my brother." Sierra's expression shifted as understanding dawned. "Benjamin, I remember when he went missing. There was talk." "What kind of talk?" Dakota pressed. "That he'd stumbled onto something dangerous, that powerful people were involved." Sierra lowered her voice. "Maxwell Blackwood's name came up, but nobody would say anything on record. His money employs too many people around here." The name struck Dakota like a physical blow. His past association with Blackwood felt like a betrayal of his brother now. "I worked for him," Dakota admitted, "years ago, shoeing horses, fixing fences. I heard things, sometimes dogs at night when there shouldn't have been any. But I needed the money. And I didn't ask questions." Sierra didn't judge him with her expression. Life on the reservation was hard, and survival sometimes meant compromises. "The Reservation Council has been divided about Blackwood for years," she said instead. "His ranch employs dozens of tribal members, sponsors the annual powwow, but there have been rumors of animals disappearing, strange vehicles coming and going at night." She stroked Naltsus gently. If Benjamin was investigating him and then vanished, the implication hung heavy between them. Sheriff Yazzie mentioned a break-in at Thunder Basin Ranch, Dakota said. Naltsus reacted to the name. I think we need to go there. Sierra nodded slowly. I'll come with you. But we need to be careful. If Blackwood is behind what happened to your brother, he won't hesitate to silence anyone else who gets too close. As they prepared to leave, Sierra pulled a small medicine pouch from her desk drawer. My grandmother made this, she explained, tying it gently around Naltsus's neck. For protection and strength. Naltsus accepted the gift with dignity, standing straighter despite his injured leg, as if already gathering the courage for whatever lay ahead. Outside, dark clouds gathered over the distant mesas, and Dakota felt the weight of his brother's absence like a physical presence. The time for silence and isolation had passed. Whatever truth waited at Thunder Basin Ranch, he would face it for Benjamin, for Naltsus, and for himself. Thunder Basin Ranch sprawled across 300 acres of scrubland at the edge of the reservation, its entrance marked by a rusted iron gate hanging askew from stone pillars. No one had maintained the cattle guard or the fencing in years, giving the approach an abandoned feel that belied the ranch's active operations. Dakota parked his truck behind a stand of juniper trees, half a mile from the main house. Best to approach cautiously. We'll go on foot from here, he told Sierra, checking his pockets for the small flashlight and Benjamin's journal. Naltsus should lead the way. Sierra nodded, her medical bag slung over one shoulder. What exactly are we looking for? Benjamin's last entry mentioned an old workshop behind the main property where evidence might be hidden. Dakota unclipped Naltsus's leash, trusting the dog's instincts. Let's see if he remembers. For a creature with an injured leg, Naltsus moved with surprising purpose, keeping low to the ground, pausing occasionally to test the air. Dakota and Sierra followed, using the sparse vegetation for cover as they skirted the main ranch buildings. No lights burned in the windows, no vehicles visible in the gravel drive, but Dakota couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Naltsus led them past a series of small outbuildings, ignoring each until they reached a dilapidated shed nearly concealed by overgrown sage. Here, the dog stopped, his entire body tensing. A low growl rumbled in his throat, not fear, but recognition and hatred. This must be the place, Sierra whispered. The padlock on the door had been recently replaced, gleaming incongruously against the weathered wood. Dakota examined it, then moved to a side window, its glass clouded with years of dust. He wiped a small circle clean and peered inside. The workshop's interior was spartanly organized bare concrete floor, workbenches along the walls, metal cages stacked in one corner. But what caught Dakota's eye was a large map pinned to the far wall, red markers scattered across it like bloodstains. I need to get inside, he muttered, searching the ground until he found a heavy rock. The sound of breaking glass seemed impossibly loud in the desert stillness. Dakota reached through carefully, unlocked the window, and hoisted himself up. Sierra followed, then helped Naltsus through the opening, the three of them standing silent in the musty interior as their eyes adjusted to the dimness. What they found turned Dakota's blood to ice. The map showed the entire Four Corners region, with red pins marking locations across the Navajo Nation and beyond. Beside it hung photographs, dogs bearing the same methodical burn patterns as Naltsus, fighting in makeshift pits, while crowds of men watched and wagered. Records of wins and losses were meticulously documented in ledgers, alongside financial transactions involving sums that staggered the imagination. It's an entire network. Sierra breathed. Not just dogfighting gambling, money laundering. But Dakota had moved beyond the map to a metal filing cabinet in the corner. The bottom drawer contained folders labeled by year. With trembling hands, he pulled the one marked 5 years earlier and spread its contents across the workbench. Inside were surveillance photographs of Benjamin entering Thunder Basin Ranch, Benjamin talking to workers, Benjamin crouched in these very woods, camera in hand. And the final image, Benjamin being forced into a black SUV by 2 men, one holding what appeared to be a gun. "He wasn't just investigating," Dakota said hoarsely. "He had proof. And they took him." A small sound from Naltsu's drew their attention. The dog stood rigid, staring at the door, ears fully alert. Outside, the crunch of tires on gravel broke the silence. Sierra moved quickly to the window. 2 vehicles coming up the drive. Men with flashlights. "We need to take what we can and go," Dakota said, gathering the photographs and ledgers. Too late. The beam of a powerful flashlight swept across the broken window, voices calling out. The door rattled against its lock. "Check around back," someone shouted. "They've got to be here somewhere." Dakota grabbed Sierra's arm, pulling her toward a rear door they hadn't noticed before. Naltsu's was already there, scratching urgently at the wood. "This way," Dakota whispered, pushing the door open to reveal a narrow path leading into dense underbrush. "Stay low and run." Hey. They had barely cleared the building when the first gunshot shattered the night, kicking up dust at their heels as they plunged into darkness. The second bullet found Dakota's shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to one knee in the dust. Pain exploded through his body, bright and terrible, as Sierra grabbed him under his good arm. "Keep moving," she hissed, trying to haul him upright as flashlight beams cut through the darkness behind them. Naltsu's circled back, pressing against Dakota's side, a low growl rumbling in his chest as he faced the approaching danger. "Go!" Dakota gasped, pushing the folder of evidence toward Sierra. "Get this to Yazzie. I'll hold them off." "I'm not leaving you," Sierra protested. But more shouts erupted behind them. "Closer now." "You have to," Dakota insisted, blood seeping through his fingers where he clutched his shoulder. "This is bigger than me, bigger than Benjamin. Those ledgers have names, important people involved in this. They'll destroy everything if they catch us all." The logic was irrefutable, but Sierra hesitated still. In that moment, Naltsus made the decision for them, grabbing the cuff of Sierra's jeans and pulling her toward the tree line. "He's right," she relented. "We'll bring back help. Stay alive. Dakota Atakai." Dakota watched them disappear into the darkness, then turned to face his pursuers. He wouldn't make it easy for them. With effort, he dragged himself behind a boulder, drawing his hunting knife, the only weapon he carried. They found him minutes later, 3 men with hard faces and harder eyes. Dakota recognized one as Blackwood's foreman, a man named Curtis he'd worked with years ago. "Should have minded your own business." "Atakai," Curtis said, training his flashlight directly into Dakota's face. "Just like your brother should have." "Where is he?" Dakota demanded, fighting to stay conscious as his blood soaked the desert sand. "What did you do to Benjamin?" Curtis's laugh was hollow. "You'll be joining him soon enough. Blackwood doesn't leave loose ends." The blow to Dakota's head came from behind, sending him sprawling. As darkness closed in, his last conscious thought was of Naltsus and Sierra running through the night, carrying the truth with them. He had failed Benjamin 5 years ago through his silence. Perhaps now, in his failure, he might finally help set things right. His last sensation before unconsciousness claimed him was the feeling of being dragged across rough ground, his blood marking the path like breadcrumbs no one would follow. Voices drifted through the darkness, pulling Dakota back to consciousness. The antiseptic smell told him he was in a hospital before he opened his eyes. The rhythmic beeping of monitors formed a backdrop to hushed conversation nearby. "He's lost a lot of blood," a woman was saying. "The bullet missed any vital organs, but the head trauma is concerning. When will he be able to talk?" That was Sheriff Yazzy's voice, tension evident in every syllable. Dakota tried to speak, but his throat felt like sandpaper. A soft whine from beside the bed drew his attention instead. Somehow, impossibly, Naaltsus was there, lying on the floor next to him, ears perking up as he sensed Dakota's awareness. "He's waking up," Sierra said, moving into Dakota's field of vision. Her face was drawn with exhaustion, a bandage covering her forearm where branches had cut her during their escape. "Water," Dakota managed to rasp. After a few careful sips, he assessed the faces gathered around his bed: Sierra, Sheriff Yazzie, and a woman he didn't recognize, her resemblance to Sierra marking her as a relative. "This is my cousin, Anaya," Sierra confirmed, following his gaze. "She's the one who called the ambulance after we got away." Dakota frowned in confusion. "How did you know where to find us?" A heavy silence filled the room. Anaya stepped forward, her eyes downcast. "Because I work for Blackwood," she said quietly. "I've been his bookkeeper for 3 years. Dakota tried to sit up, pain shooting through his bandaged shoulder. "You're part of it," he accused. "Not the way you think," Anaya replied, her voice steady despite her obvious shame. "I took the job because we needed the money when my mother got sick. I kept it because I discovered what your brother was doing." The revelation hung in the air like smoke. "Benjamin approached me 5 years ago," she continued. "He'd figured out what was happening at Thunder Basin and needed someone on the inside to gather evidence. I was helping him." "Then why is my brother gone?" Dakota demanded. Anaya's composure cracked. "Someone betrayed us. Not me. I was supposed to meet him that night with financial records. But he never showed up. I've been gathering evidence ever since, waiting for the right moment." Sheriff Yazzie cleared his throat. "We found Benjamin." "Dakota, early this morning." The world seemed to stop spinning. "Alive," Dakota whispered, though he already knew the answer. Yazzie shook his head. "Buried at the edge of Thunder Basin property. Anaya led us to the location after she brought the evidence you and Sierra collected." Grief crashed over Dakota in waves, but alongside it rose another emotion: vindication. "And Blackwood in custody as we speak," the sheriff confirmed, "along with half a dozen associates. The evidence is overwhelming, not just the dogfighting and gambling, but money laundering for a drug operation across 4 states. And now, murder." Anaya stepped closer to the bed. "There's something else you should know," she said. "The dog Naltsus. Benjamin saved him from the fighting ring the week before he disappeared. He was keeping him at a safe house, trying to rehabilitate him. That's why Naltsus recognized his scent on you," Sierra added softly. "You're identical twins." He knew you were connected to the person who saved him. Dakota reached down to touch Naltsus's head, the full circle of their connection finally complete. He found his way back, he murmured, to finish what Benjamin started. Spring came to the reservation earlier than usual, painting the desert with wildflowers in shades of yellow and purple. The transformation of Thunder Basin Ranch had been equally dramatic. Where once fear and cruelty had reigned, now healing took root. Dakota stood on the newly built observation deck, watching as volunteers worked with the latest group of rescued animals. 3 months since his release from the hospital. His shoulder still ached in cold weather. But the deeper wounds, the ones no one could see, were finally beginning to heal. Sierra says the new German Shepherd is ready to meet potential adopters next week, Sheriff Yazzie said, joining Dakota at the railing. Now retired from law enforcement, Yazzie had become the sanctuary's most dedicated volunteer, finding purpose in his golden years among the animals. "That's the 5th one this month," Dakota replied, pride evident in his voice. "The Second Chance Ranch is living up to its name." The idea had come to him during his recovery to transform Blackwood's property into a rehabilitation center for abused animals. The tribal council, eager to make amends for their years of turning a blind eye to Blackwood's operations, had unanimously approved the transfer of the seized property to the new nonprofit foundation established in Benjamin's name. "Your brother would be proud," Yazzie said, his weathered face softening. "Justice was served. But this," he gestured at the sprawling sanctuary, "this is healing for everyone." Dakota nodded, watching as Sierra led a therapy session with local veterans, each paired with a rescue dog. The power of these wounded souls helping each other recover had exceeded everyone's expectations. Naltsus limped across the yard toward them, his gait permanent but much improved under Sierra's care. Unlike the other rescues, he would never be adopted out. He had found his home already. "The school group is here," Sierra called from below, waving toward the approaching bus. 5th graders from Shiprock. They raised $3,000 selling beaded collars. Dakota smiled, remembering how the community had initially been divided about the sanctuary, some arguing that limited resources should go toward human needs, others insisting that healing the relationship between people and animals would benefit everyone. Now, with volunteers coming from across the reservation and beyond, those arguments had faded. As he descended to greet the children, Naltsus at his side, Dakota caught sight of the simple stone marker erected near the entrance, in memory of Benjamin Adakai, who spoke for those without voices. It still hurt to read his brother's name, but the sharp pain had mellowed into something else, purpose, perhaps, or peace. Benjamin's work continued through different hands now, his compassion living on in every animal saved and every person healed by the connection. "Come on, old friend," Dakota said to Naltsus, scratching behind the dog's ears. "We've got work to do, together." The man and dog, who had both been broken, walked toward the future they had built from the ashes of their past. Different, scarred, but ultimately stronger for having found each other when no one else would take a chance on either of them. In a world that often values the shiny and new, Dakota and Naltsus remind us that our scars tell the stories that matter most. Remember when communities pulled together without question, when a neighbor's struggle became everyone's concern. This story echoes the America many of us grew up in, where second chances weren't just platitudes but commitments we made to each other. Like Dakota, Many of us carry wounds from choices made when life painted us into corners. Like Naltsu's, we've felt the sting of being overlooked when our usefulness seemed diminished. But this sanctuary represents what we can still create, places where broken things aren't discarded but treasured for their resilience, where the wisdom earned through suffering becomes the foundation for something beautiful. The bond between this man and dog speaks to what we've always known in our hearts, that healing happens in connection, not isolation. That standing up for what's right is never wasted, even when justice takes its time. As we enter our golden years, perhaps our greatest contribution isn't what we build anew, but how we transform what's been damaged into something even more precious than before. Some things are worth saving, no matter how broken they appear at auction. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.